Hey, good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
As we prepare to get started, on behalf of the Minority Mental Health Project Board of Directors, we want to thank everyone for investing your time this evening with a very important topic. My name is Damon Cobble, and I am the founder and executive director of the Minority Mental Health Project. And one of our goals through education and advocacy is to help people with mental illness understand that they are not alone with their struggles and that getting treatment can make all the difference. Today, we have an amazing panel on God Can Fix What We Don't Face, where we will be talking about ways church leaders can support people with mental illness. Cassandra Gray, licensed marriage and family therapist and CEO of Creative Spirits Behavior Health. The Reverend Dr. Bruce Williams, senior pastor of Bates Memorial Baptist Church. The Reverend Dr. Kevin Cosby, senior pastor of St. Stephen Baptist Church and president of Simmons College of Kentucky. The Reverend David Snardon, pastor of Joshua Tabernacle Missionary Baptist Church and president of the Interdenominational Ministerial Coalition. Next, our moderator, our hometown girl, our Derby City bred, Ms. Krystal Goodner-Spratt, will be leading this discussion. And again, we thank everyone and we look forward to this conversation. And Ms. Krystal, it's all yours.
Thank you so much, Mr. Damon Cobble. And once again, we want to thank the Minority Mental Health Project for bringing us an insightful and informative forum where we can come together as members of the community and have a very necessary discussion. I want to welcome all of the panelists, and I must say hello to my pastor, Reverend Dr. Kevin W. Cosby. Hey, Rev. All right, well, I'll start off by saying this. I have an affinity for the Black church. You know, the Black church has raised me. It supported me and helped to frame me into the woman that I am today. But with all things, there are flaws. Historically, this institution would not address, brush under the rug, or blame on the devil anytime the subject of mental health would arise. We were taught to pray about everything, but in some respects, the saints were good about making you feel small if your faith didn't measure up, and you asked for more help when dealing with issues that you couldn't pray away. This evening, we're going to hear from our city's faith leaders in a discussion entitled, God Can't Fix What You Do Not Face. But real quick, I'm going to read this statistic or this information that was truly staggering. It says African Americans reportedly have a greater severity of untreated mental disorders than any other racial group. History purports that African Americans are more likely to rely on the elders of their churches and their own spiritual beliefs rather than seek support from mental health professionals. I want to first go to Pastor Cassandra Gray, who is our licensed therapist. Could you kind of give us some framework on how and why the conversation of mental health has always been a taboo subject for the Black church?
So, hey everybody. Praise the Lord. It's a blessing to be here. I would say, and it's very important for us to understand the historical context, especially with our people and the things that we have experienced mentally, physically, and spiritually coming through. So from a historical lens, we know that we, African Americans, we were used as the test subjects during the developmental stages of mental health for, help for mental health. So we were the test subjects. And so a lot of our confidence in the people who were in charge of helping others didn't see fit to help us. And so there was a lot of meds, there was a lot of experiments, there was a lot of different things that was said, whether you were dark skinned, whether you're light skinned, whether your nose was flat bridged, eyes wide apart, all those different things meant something to the world of psychology and to the world of mental health. And so from a historical lens, that stigma for help with mental health has come from that lens. And so it's important, as we're dealing with mental health today, understanding that that was the beginnings of the field. Of course, like every other field, we've evolved. And, you know, we've been able to understand that it's not about race or your skin tone or your nose bridge or your lips or your eyes, but it has to deal with the content and chemical makeup of your mind plus your experience. So that's kind of, in a nutshell, really quick, a real quick overview of that, but just really understanding that. Yeah. And being able to see that and be open to the process a little bit more now today. You know, the last thing I would say about that is there's a lot of more cultural competent therapists. So it's not someone experimenting with your mind now. We don't experiment in that way. We actually come in and really give help, give healing, pass love, compassion, kindness, and really try to make a difference in your life.
All right, Pastor Cassandra, thank you so much. And I'm going to throw out a question or a topic, and I want you all to just jump right in. But would anyone like to piggyback on that, maybe providing more historical reference on why mental health is not addressed in the Black church? And if you could actually reference some of your own personal experiences as being pastors of churches. Well,
good evening, Krystal, and good evening to all the other panelists. And I wouldn't mind just chiming in on this. I would say that mental health in the Black church has been addressed, is being addressed. It just may not be in a conventional Western methodology that we're speaking about today. There are some limits to what we're able to do. And I think the issue is when we hit our limits, we may not always recognize that, but when you have limited resources and when your parishioners may have limited resources, or you have to also respect the cultural makeup, you have to respect their own wishes, and sometimes they may be resistant for a multitude of reasons. You do the best you can with what you have. But I would definitely say if it wasn't for the counseling of our elders, sagely wisdom, good models, people that have gone through and came out of situations to speak on their own experiences. It may not be the academic direction that we're speaking of today, but marriages have been saved, suicide has been curbed. There's a multitude of things that we may not be able to capture empirically about what the Black church has been able to do with its people, but surely if we wasn't there to stand in the gap, those things would be much more noticeable. The other thing is, and I think Dr. Gray kind of piggybacked, Dr. Gray pointed this out, is that contextual cultural makeup of understanding the angst, the trauma, the history, the cultural makeup of the people that you're dealing with. And so no one wants to go somewhere to any kind of doctor, go for any type of help to a person that doesn't understand their own context, their own makeup, their own issues. But I would say the Black church has in its own way dealt with mental health, even if it has not used the terminology, even if our language was limited. Even if our understanding to the depths of what was taking place, we have done a phenomenal job with the limited resources and abilities that might have been given to us at the time.
All right. Thank you so much, Pastor Snardon. And you talked about suicide, and the conversation of suicide has truly come to the surface more than any time that I can remember. And it's actually hitting celebrities. But Miss USA, beautiful, young 30-year-old Black woman, commits suicide. And just in the headlines, it's becoming more evident now more than ever. And here's some statistics. The CDC reports that back in 2018, more than 48,000 Americans died by suicides. Now, Black suicide attempts have increased in Louisville, and youth suicide has increased in Louisville within the last 5 years. Now, what role, if any, do you think the church plays in speaking on the conversation of suicide? Pastor Cosby, would you like to tackle that one?
Thank you so much, Krystal, for giving me the difficult question to respond to. First of all, I'm so glad to see these outstanding colleagues who are doing the work on a consistent basis. And I cannot applaud Damon Cobble for the great work that he's doing. And all of our churches need to get behind him and to support him in every possible way that we can. But first of all, I want to affirm what my colleagues have already said, Dr. Cassandra and Dr. Snardon. I totally agree with him that the Black church has always been engaged in mental health for Black people. And if you want to know the role the Black church has played historically, then I recommend that you reread W.E.B. Du Bois's book, The Souls of Black People, the chapter entitled The Faith of Our Fathers. Now, what's interesting, and this is debatable, is that Du Bois gravitates more towards agnosticism, and I would say a healthy agnosticism, because he militates against Eurocentric Christianity that partners and collaborates with white supremacy and white oppression. But he talks about how the church was the center. This is 1903 of everything. So when it comes to mental health, mental stability, the church has always been there to provide mental stability, I think, for our people. I think that there is a need, however, to destigmatize mental illness in the Black church, and that we should be affirming what Scripture says in Psalms 103, that God is the God that healeth all of our diseases, and disease are diseased. And Black people have every right to be diseased in this white supremacist culture. I recommend, as I close my comments, there's a book called Black Fatigue by a brilliant scholar, Mary Frances Winters. And I don't know if you've seen it, but she talks about the fatigue of being Black in America. It is outstanding, Black fatigue. And this is what Mary Frances, this is how she defines Black fatigue. She says, I define Black fatigue as repeated variations of stress that result in extreme exhaustion and cause mental, physical, and spiritual maladies that are passed down from generation to generation. And she goes on to say, it is about the fatigue that comes from the pain and anguish of living with racism every single day of your life. There is not one day that Black people do not have to live with the pressure of being Black in racistic America. So I think it's important that the church be the place of asylum and refuge, and we do all that we can to bring into our churches counselors like Dr. Gray, who look at us through an Afrocentric lens, through a Black lens, and look at our experience through a Black lens. Oh yes, and back to suicide one quickly.
Yeah.
And that is, all of us are committing suicide. Some of us committed instantly, quickly. Others of us are committing it slowly, unconsciously. When I know I'm not supposed to be eating certain things, but I eat certain things to medicate myself, then that's a form of suicide. We all do it. When I take foolish chances, that's a form of suicide. And this idea that suicide is the unforgivable, unpardonable sin is not rooted in Scripture. We are saved by grace, and grace covers everything, including suicide. And that's my opinion, my way of understanding Scripture.
Thank you so much, Pastor Cosby. I love it. Every conversation or forum, he's going to give you a book to reference. I love that. Pastor Bruce Williams, how are you doing this evening, Pastor Williams? I got my voice back. This question is posed to you. What are the biggest challenges facing church leadership when it comes to mental health in the church? I mean, you can speak from personal reference, some things that you've dealt with, or just speak on just your thoughts on that.
Thank you so much, and I'm glad your voice is back. The last time we were together, you were struggling, but that's because every time we have something like this, they always call on you because you're quintessential host. And I'm glad to be on here with colleagues as well. Dr. Cosby mentioned. And so I'm really glad to be here. We had some technical difficulty getting on, but we troubleshot, and now I'm here. And I've really been enriched by some of the comments I've heard. And I do want to, you talk about the greatest challenges, let me first of all, again, affirm what has been said. To me, given the struggles that people of Ebony U have had to deal with since we've come to these shores, the very fact that anybody is sane is a miracle to me. And that is because the one institution that Dr. Cosby mentioned and W.B. Du Bois and others have mentioned is because of this peculiar institution called the Black Church. And I'm being very intentional about saying the Black Church because some people say there isn't a Black church, but there is, and it exists. And the reason why the Black church exists is not because we don't like white people, is we don't like white racism and white supremacy. And so Black church came into fruition formally as a way of survival. That is physical, psychological, economic survival. It existed even during the enslavement period in brush arbors and the like, but it became institutionalized for the purposes of survival. And so it has carried us from that moment on, and we have survived and thrived, even in the midst of it, as a consequence of the unique institution we had that that Black people had to go to for everything, including that. Also, want to affirm some of the things that have been said about how the church can address the issue of suicide. I believe that, especially in the Black church, one of the places to start is from the pulpit. I think if we're going to destigmatize it, the one person whose words historically have had weight in the congregation is a pastor. And so it's very difficult to get things done if a pastor is not supportive of it. If he's not supportive of removing the stigmatism, if he's not supportive of referencing or referring people to professional help, if he's not open to the theological notion that you can have prayer and therapy, those kind of things, those two things go together. And I also want to point out that one of the benefits that the Black church has had is kind of mirrored in when Paul and Silas was in prison and the earthquake shook and set them free, and the jailer knew they were free, and the jailer was going to kill himself. And Paul says to him, "Do yourself no harm, we are all here." And that's a word that needs to be communicated to anybody who's under such stress that they feel like they're not capable of going forward. They need a community that affirms who they are, and they need a community that affirms that they are valuable. And the Black church does that for Black people. And we need to be saying to the Black community, do yourself no harm, we are all here. The greatest challenges, I think, are resources. I think we don't have access to resources the way other people do, especially certainly our white counterparts. When you don't have access to healthcare, and when healthcare is contingent upon your income and your zip code and the like, then one of the greatest obstacles that Black people have is just access to adequate medical care. And the Black church has to be an advocate for that access. So one of the things that's happening in the West End I love is Norton and Goodwill putting $100 million together to put the on 28th Street to put down an institution that people have access to in terms of their proximity to it. But proximity is good, but it's only as good as access. And so I think the church needs to be an advocate of universal health care, and that is that everybody get health care, and it's a right to get health care. So I think the biggest obstacle that the church has is convincing our government and leaders in the healthcare industry that Black people need to have healthcare. Another thing that we have to deal with is when we do have access to healthcare providers don't see Black people the same way as they see others, so that we are always treated as if we are exaggerating our symptoms. And that the myth, the narrative and historical myth that somehow Black people can endure more. Then if a woman, and we know this is true now, that if a woman comes in and is complaining about pain, or a man comes in complaining about pain, they're not taken seriously. And so not only do we need to have access, but there needs to be an attitude alteration in those who provide access for Black people. So I think that is the other biggest obstacle we have to, there are others, but those two are the ones I want to cite at this point, and I don't want to take up everyone's time.
Thank you, Pastor Williams. I tell you, you definitely hit on something there. Pastor Cassandra Gray is nodding her head. Damon is nodding his head. Pastor Gray, jump in there on what he was talking about, how a lot of times when African Americans go to the doctor, we're not always believed about what we're dealing with and going through.
I think it is imperative for us to definitely learn our bodies and know what we're feeling and expressing, and being able to communicate that to our doctors and to our physicians. That is very important. It's also important, today there are culturally competent therapists, nurse practitioners, doctors, physicians, psychiatrists, all within our reach. And so I think the biggest thing right now is just convincing our people that it's okay. And, it's a continuation. So it's an and not an or. When it comes to church and when it comes to mental health and church, when it comes to our physical and mental and spiritual health, that it's an and. Yes, I do need my doctor. Yes, I do need my church. Yes, I do need my therapist. It's a and it's not a or, and that is very, very important. One thing that I do want to point out that I want to echo some of the things that was said, especially about our churches. We've been doing mental health all along, and I agree with everyone that has spoken here tonight. We just didn't call it mental health, but we call it the clapping of hands. There's a release that happens, the lifting of hands, and lifting our hands up and then opening our hands and releasing unto God. Those are things, those are techniques, those are strategies, those are interventions that we give as therapists. Lift up your hands but those are things that we've been doing in the church all along, having movement in the body, the spiritual dance that we do, the shout that we do. All of those things are areas in which we release. We call it spiritual release, but it's also a physical release. It also presents itself as a mental release. So yes, we are the oldest mental health proponents that have been here. And so I wanted to make sure that that I echoed that, making sure when we shout hallelujah, just shouting, releasing that shout releases those muscles here, the stretch and the face, all of those things. Those are all releases, and those are things that as therapists we give today as strategies. And so we're just continuing the things that we already have and that we already do.
Pastor Gray, historically, mental health has been equated with mental illness. As awareness about mental health and mental illness come forth, can you kind of give us an overview of these two terms and how do you correctly utilize them?
So today, when we talk about mental health, we're talking about the impact that life and the different challenges that life has had upon us physically, mentally, and spiritually. So when we talk about mental health, we're talking about issues that come in our lives that releases different things in our physical body that could cause depression, that could cause anxiety, that can cause stress, that can cause worry. And so when we talk about mental health, we're talking about dealing with the health of our mindset, dealing with the health of our mindset. When you're talking about mental illness, which is not a common term that we really use today therapeutically, in calling it an illness, but when we talk about an illness, we're talking about something a little different than just a little bit of depression or a little bit of sadness. This is when it comes on and it's extended. I can't get up. I've been in now for 2 weeks. I'm not able to think clear. I don't feel like I'm able to get dressed. And so the illness part of it comes in when it starts to impact us physically, our physical body. So it's disturbing my sleep. I'm not able to eat. I'm walking around with excessive worry. That's the physical malady of mental health, per se. So when we're talking about those two things, mental health is all the words and verbiage. But when we start talking about the illness part of it, we're talking, if I'm dealing with worry and anxiety, my mind can't stop racing. I'm up at night. I can't seem to focus. And it's going on for extended times. It's now starting to impact our bodies, right? And so that when we start talking about the illness part of mental health, that's the illness that we want to make sure we address. That's when we need to look at more professional. We would need to look at a psychiatrist. We would need to look at medical doctor to rule out anything, medical, and then start looking at psychiatry to start looking at the mind and looking at how the experiences of life or the different things that has been impacting us is actually impacting us now in a more physical way.
Pastor Cassandra Gray, thank you so much for that. And it seemed that we have more people coming into the room, and we're also streaming live on Facebook. So hello to everyone that is watching us over there on Facebook. If you have a question for our panel, we're going to try to get to questions at the end of this conversation, probably about 10 minutes before we wrap. So go ahead and put your questions or comments down in the comments section below. And I know this next question or conversational piece, we're going to have some great response here as it talks about racial trauma. In December 2020, the mayor declared racism as a public health crisis in Louisville. In 2020, the mayor declared racism as a public health crisis in Louisville. The terminology racial trauma began to surface following the protests of 2020. The term refers to the mental and emotional injury caused by encounters with racial bias, and ethnic discrimination, racism, and hate crimes, and any individual that has experienced an emotionally painful, sudden, and uncomfortable racist encounter is at risk of suffering from race-based traumatic stress injury. In your opinion, in what ways does systematic racism contribute to mental illness and violence in the Black and Brown communities? In your opinion, what role does racial trauma play in the mental health of Blacks? And anyone can jump in.
Well, let me respond to that. And part of our trauma is the refusal to recognize the reality of racism and white supremacy. Because with the anti-critical race theorists who attribute anything that makes whites uncomfortable as critical race theory, there is a culture of dismissiveness and a quest for innocence on the part of whites. But the fact is, Black people are a captured people, and we live daily under the aegis of white domination. White normativity, from hair to facial features, created what Naim, the psychologist Naim Akbar, referred to as anti-self deformity. So we have anti-self deformity because what has been projected to us as the norm is white standards, white features. And when you can't adjust to those norms, then it damages you psychologically. In addition to that, you're constantly under the pressure daily of knowing that because you are Black, there is a stigma, and you're put in a box in terms of your abilities. You're already prejudged. There's bias against you just because of your color. So this stress that we are under, we internalize, and that's why there's a disproportionate amount of physical sickness because of the psychological. And you've all heard the phrase that what goes on in the mind registers itself in the body, that the mind and body live so close together that they catch each other's diseases. So these things affect us. And if you look at the data, I am in West Louisville. If you live in Prospect, your life expectancy is 15 years longer than a person who lives in one of the communities in West Louisville. And then also to know that I'm a part of a community that does not matter. We just don't count. When you think this is the real problem with West Louisville, here it is, and I'm through. The problem with West Louisville is that West Louisville is a place to leave and not a place to live. So it's a place to leave and not a place to live. And it's a place to leave and not live because it's never been a place to love. And you spell love, it's a 4-letter word. And everyone has alluded to it. This is how you spell love. It's a 4-letter word. C-A-S-H. All the resources have been maldistributed. And if you don't believe me, then just do this. Start at Shiny Park, drive down Broadway, turn right on Baxter, and see the deprivation of Broadway. But when you get to Eastern Cemetery and turn down Baxter and start going towards Highlands and the Douglas Loop all the way to Sullivan University, see the commerce, see the wealth, and see the disparity. How did this happen? How did this maldistribution of wealth and opportunity happen? It's just a socially constructed reality that we are experiencing because of racism, and white supremacy has maldistributed everything. And Black people have to live with the stress of that on a daily basis.
Wow. Thank you so much, Dr. Cosby. Pastor Williams were very instrumental and involved in the protests. And I remember that actually mental health professionals were brought there to help the protesters. You want to talk a little bit about that and just kind of talk about racial trauma and its effect on the Black psyche?
Yeah, one of the strategies to help mitigate against mental health for Black people is anti-racist behavior. That is any strategies we have to eliminate racism and white supremacy. Dr. Cosby mentioned what one scholar has suggested is this insistence on white innocence. the narrative of white innocence. One of the things that has been stressful for Black people since 1619 is the denial that it exists. And when Black people complain about what they know they're experiencing, the greater society says you're just imagining it. So you're already experiencing the trauma of it. Now you're experiencing the trauma of people not believing you about the trauma. And then you start second guessing yourself about whether the trauma is really there or not. One of the benefits of having people during the protests use their phones and others to record things is that now people are, beginning to record what we've always said all along. And I know some people say, well, it's getting worse. No, it's getting recorded. It's not getting worse, it's just getting recorded. So we brought mental health people on at the protest for the obvious reasons. And that is not only were we responding in a rational way to racism and white supremacy by protest, but so that people could take advantage of it, because people are acknowledging that at every dimension of life, Black people are stressed and are traumatized. And it's not only at every level, whether it's education, whether it's the fact that the police do not protect and serve us, but put us under surveillance. We're not protected and served, we're being controlled. But it's in the economics, as Dr. Cosby has brought out, and it's multi-generational. That is, that not only are we having to deal with it, but our children have to deal with it. And it's not just macro, that is on a larger scale, but it's micro aggressions that have to happen on a daily basis to ourselves and each succeeding generation. So this trauma is not only present in our generation, but it's being handed down. It's not only being handed down because the generations that come after us have to experience the same thing, but the effects of trauma on us affect the way we relate to each other, including the next generation. And so we're having to deal with multiple layers of trauma as a consequence of the environment we're in. And we're trying to survive an environment we didn't even create. We didn't create white supremacy. We didn't create the racism we have to deal with on a daily basis. And the distribution of goods that Dr. Cosby brought in, or the poor educational system. The reason why Black people are at the bottom of every conceivable category is not because Black people are inferior. It's because, as Dr. Cosby mentioned, it's a socially constructed reality, and it's happening because it's planned that way. And it's good mental health for Black people to acknowledge that we know this is the case, and not be duped into believing that somehow it is because of us that we are where we are. And if we would just try harder, then we too can be like our white counterparts. That's one of the biggest lies that's ever been told. Our white counterparts don't have to deal with anything like that. In fact, our white counterparts don't even have to think about the fact that they're white until they're around other people who are not like them. Black people are constantly reminded in negative ways about our culture, about our color and culture. And so trauma is real. But I was involved in that phase, in that part of protest, because protest takes many phases and ways. But I was on the front line involved in it because I believe it was good for my mental health, and it was good for the mental health of Black people to be involved in an effort to deal with the thing that's causing the trauma. Dr. King says one of the great glories of American democracy is the right to protest for right. But not only is it a right, it's therapeutic to protest against right. And I think when Black people are scolded for being angry about their circumstance, we need to flip that and recognize that anger and frustration is a rational, healthy response to racism and white supremacy. I would be concerned if you weren't angry. My problem is why you ain't mad. Why you not frustrated by it? That to me is healthy. I think anti-racist behavior is good. It's good for mental health.
Thank you so much, Pastor Williams. And someone placed in the comments section, the Office for Safe and Healthy Neighborhoods can offer racial trauma therapy to your churches. If you could provide a website or phone number with that information, we would appreciate it. Pastor Snardon, you were very active in the Interdenominational Ministerial Coalition, very active in the community. You have a church in West Louisville. Can you lend anything to this conversation as it relates to racial trauma?
Yes, with what's taking place in our country historically, I don't know why anyone does not go seek self-care, mental health. I think one of the things we need to lift up about mental health is that there's different levels. I think one of the taboos is that I don't want to be put on medicine. I don't trust the physician, the counselor, the therapist. But there are different levels to mental health, taking care of oneself. And there are some self-care that can take place. Being able to cut off the TV, being able to detach, being able to get in some quiet spaces, being able to reflect. The church itself has used what counselors use all the time is small groups. Even in Bible study, especially when it's dialogical, where you're able to study, but also hear back from other people and get feedback. There are groups of assimilation where people come together because of different interests that collide together, and they're able to give one another support. All these types of things really help us when it comes to our mental health. I think one way forward, however, is for us also to remember our past and remember what our forefathers have had to go through in the heat of Jim Crow, in the heat of emancipation, in the heat of slavery, and how I recall reading how Martin Luther King talked about how his community actually protected him from the realities of racism and white supremacy before integration. And that's where he developed this idea of somebodyness, that you are somebody. It wasn't until he left his community that he began to understand the depths of difference and the evils of white supremacy and how it worked and how it pressed upon the psyche of people, Black people and white people thinking they're better and Black people agreeing with that. And so we have some things at our disposal in our own communities, even historically, that we can help take care of one another. And the Black church has always been a symbol and a source of hope. I've had some conversations with some people that have all been very critical of the Black church. And I pointed out to them, if we didn't do another thing, the Black church is the Blackest thing that the Black community knows just by being around. It has Black leadership, it serves Black people, it's based in Black economics. Many of our churches now own its own institutions and they're over 100 years old, which means the Black dollar matters. It has promoted Black leadership. I can remember growing up in the church and we had a Sunday school superintendent and they ran Sunday school like it was a school. We had secretaries that knew how to take minutes and they were top-notch secretaries that can lead any other institution. We had chairmen. Nobody will let you be a chairman anywhere else, but people took pride in what they did and they were the best chairman, the best secretary, the best administrator, that if they were able to apply to a Fortune 500 company, they were top-notch professionals. And so our communities need to remember our past in order to move forward and demand the best, not just because you got to be better to get anything, but because we are the best. And to instill that pride and to insulate our children with what real community looks like when you're not afraid of your children. And all children are your children. I think about the story of Maddie Jones and all of the children that she adopted, but she treated those children as if they were her own, where people thought they were her children. They were hers by adoption, but she treated them like they were hers by birth. And I remember so many families and mothers of the church that treated us in such a fashion. One of the things that I will critique us on is not focusing more on what we can do and focusing more on what's been done to us and what they should do to correct it. Because white America has proven time and time again that they're not willing to do what's right. They're not willing to. Even when they put forward a good face, it's not enough to actually help. In fact, they give you enough to hang yourself, give you enough to be frustrated with, give you enough just to come back to have to beg for more. And what we should really be focusing on is what we have in our hand. We have built this country, we have built nations, we have done little with nothing. Even this idea of family is a white idea of family. It's always been the community for us. It's always been the extended family. We've always taken care of our own. It's only been recently that we've been that we send our loved ones to nursing homes. We would take care of them right there with dementia, with physical ailments. We found a way to take care of our own because we did not have choices. It's all that we had.
Wow.
And when I think about where we come from, if we would remember, not throw the baby out with the bathwater, we need to progress and we need to move forward and we need to use what is now better at our disposal. But if we would remember how we made it over, we already have tools at our disposal that we just need to kick back up again.
Wow. Pastor David Snardon, thank you so much. I think you could do the mic drop after that conversation, but you really brought something to light. Pastor Cosby's clapping for you. You really brought something to light, how the Black church truly represents community. And Pastor Cosby, could you take for a moment to give them the interesting analogy that you give when talking about the Black church and the white church, waffles and spaghettis, waffles and spaghetti. Could you kind of talk about that real quick?
I'm trying to remember what the analogy was, Krystal.
Just how Black church is.
Oh yes, okay, yes, okay. Yeah. Thank you so much. I got it now. The Black church, the white church is more like waffles in the sense that they have compartmentalized their life. So they don't integrate their faith with justice. So economics is in one box. Family is in one box, business is in one box, politics is in one box. So therefore, they're not going to integrate and allow the box that is religion to affect the box that has to do with capitalism and politics and economics. The Black church is more like spaghetti, so that all of it is intertangled, intermixed, interconnected, so that our faith, our politics, our life are all interrelated and interconnected. And so that's healthy. But I was clapping for Dr. Snardon because he is so right that the Black community has been deinstitutionalized. Can I read a passage? This is from Malcolm and Martin by James Cone. James Cone, Malcolm, Martin and Malcolm. And on page 226, James Cone on 226. So if you have the book, just remember 226. He cites something Martin Luther King said in 1967 in a speech he gave in Louisville, Kentucky. And this is what he said. This is 1967. This is the king that I call the king of pessimism. There are three kings: the king of optimism, the king of realism, optimism 63, realism 65, pessimism 66 to 68. King, if you talk about mental health, King was morbidly depressed, especially the last year of his life, because he realized that America could not be converted. He realized it. So he was, you talk about a depressed individual. Martin King Jr. was depressed. But this is what he said in Louisville. Now, I don't believe in Black separatism. I'm against it. But I do say this. It seems that our white brothers and sisters don't want to live next door to us. So listen to these verbs. So they're pinning us in central cities. We're hemmed in, pinned in, hemmed in. We can't get out. They won't pass fair housing bill here. And that's true in every city in this country. Now, since they're just going to keep us here, what we're going to have to do is just control the central city, which is what Dr. Snardon is saying, that we've got to take back over our communities. We've got to rebuild our institutions. When I was young in West Louisville, we had Black professionals, we had Black businesses, we had Black churches, we had, and the younger generation has no idea what type of community we had, even though it was segregated. And here's the good news. This is what our kids don't have today. Though there was always white supremacy and racism, but we didn't feel the onslaught of it because the elders buffered us. There was a buffer around us in our institutions that kept that away from us so that we didn't feel the full impact. Those buffers have been taken away, and our kids are feeling the full impact of white supremacy at an early age. And until we can reconstitute our own institutions, our own HBCUs, our own churches, our own businesses, our own Black media, so we can view reality through a Black lens. Until we can do that, I don't think there's going to, that's the only, in my opinion, hope and answer for the Black community. And again, I affirm what Dr. Snardon said, because the church may have many critics, but the church has no rivals. Mm-hmm. When you think about the fact that it is Black owned, Black governed, Black facilities, and open, we need Black professionals to come back to the Black church, to Black teachers. We have the space, Black tutors, Black counselors. We need all that back in the Black church, because if our people has any hope, it's going to be because we've rebuilt and reconstituted our own institutions.
Wow. This conversation has truly taken an exciting turn, but we love it. And anytime we can talk about just celebrating being Blackity Black, I absolutely love it. Pastor Bruce Williams, I want to let you chime in on that. And then Pastor Cassandra Gray, I want you to kind of leave us with information, resources. Where do we go from here? In what ways can we, as the Black church, further support or try to support mental wellness? So Pastor Bruce Williams and then Pastor Cassandra Gray.
Sure. Let me say ditto to so much of what has been said, the importance of Black institutions. And I think Dr. Snardon used a term that triggered in my head. He said insulated. And notice he said insulated and not isolated. You've heard people use this before, but when Jochebed, when Moses was born during the time when legislation was to throw Black babies in the river, she isolated him, and then it says she could isolate him no more, and she put him in the ark, and the ark kept him. She put something inside the ark that kept it floating. So it was insulated. The ark was insulated from what was outside of it, that is the Nile. So it kept from sinking because of what was in it. Those institutions in those areas, HBCUs, Black churches, Black communities, they isolated children so that they could insulate children, because white supremacy is everywhere. But they were isolated so they could be insulated. So they were isolated in homes, isolated in communities, isolated in HBCUs. That's why I'm a great advocate of HBCUs, and Simmons is our HBCU, because it has the capacity to prepare people with what they need inside them to handle this ever-present reality of racism and white supremacy until it is dismantled, if it ever is. But this idea that we need to be insulated, the Black church has been the only institution that can provide everything Black people need. We can provide food, shelter, clothing, and we can provide everything that other institutions can't. That is the spiritual component of it. That part of it, Goodwill can't do. Habitat for Humanity can't do. They're good institutions, but the church can do those things, plus put something in Black people, a sense of somebodiness, a faith in a God who believes that we believe is on our side, that God, James Jones says, chooses sides, and that Jesus has a affinity for people who are the most vulnerable. If you've done it to the least of these, I take it personally, Jesus said, you've done it also unto me. And I think it's imperative. And I'm gonna say something, I'm gonna just say it because Dr. Cosby brought it up, so I'll just blame it on him. But he was talking about how Black professionals need to return, many of them. Now we have some who are there. I have a church full of people like Charles Booker and Sadiqa Reynolds and Delquan Dorsey and a whole host of others who are doing exceptional work, as I'm sure others, other pastors do. But there are some professionals who need to come home and find out that there's no place like home. I think some of the casualties of white supremacy, racism, and white supremacy is the notion that if it's white, it's better. And so some of our white professionals have been lured into other churches that call themselves multicultural because they have different races in the same space. But that's not a multicultural church, because diversity, multiculturalism is not simply sharing the same space, it's shared power. And in those institutions and places, Black people may have the same space. They'll become sing in the choir, but you don't have the same power. It is a model of the larger society, and they treat you there just like they treated in large society. And most of those churches didn't have much substantive to say during the time when police brutality was going on, et cetera. So I think we need to make sure institutions raise our children in such a way that they know that they are loved and that they owe something to the institution, Black community. But also we need to challenge some of our Black professionals to come home and help us, help our communities survive this horrible and damnable thing called racism and white supremacy.
Wow. I'll just say the doors of the church are open. Pastor Cassandra Gray, I'm gonna toss it over to you.
Wow, this has just been amazing. This has been great. I'm sitting here thinking about just the racial disparities and the things that we experience in the rooms of mental health as we're working with our people, and seeing just what you're saying, looking at the disparities and what happens when you can instill hope and help someone to really tap into that creative side of them, and that side of them that God has placed all his goodness inside. And so that's one of the biggest things that we offer as therapists and as counselors working with our people. And that is not bringing something outside, but helping you to see what's already in you. We understand there's been trauma. We understand there's been, we look at the epigenetics, looking at how, from slavery on that, genetically we carry a lot of those factors. But being able to help people to highlight that, understand that, and know that doesn't create a deficit, that that you are bodacious, that you're awesome, that you're amazing, and helping our people to be able to tap into that is one of our greatest joys. And it's one of my greatest joys as therapists. And I know all my whole team, we're client-centered and making sure. So one of the things you want to do when you're looking for a good therapist, I love what Dr. Snardon said. You want to look at two things. One, I want to look, do I just need some prevention type of things? I may not need intensive therapy, but I just need to come in and just talk to somebody about, some of the things that I've experienced and some of the impact that has had on me, and being intentional about doing a checkup on yourself. We go in for physical checkups. We also want to make sure that we go in for mental health checkups, and making sure that we can take a look at all the racism and all the different things that we're experiencing has come our way. We want to make sure that it hasn't polluted our thinking or that it hasn't infiltrated our hearts. So we want to make sure of that. So that's on the prevention side. So when you're looking for a good therapist, you want to look on the prevention side, and you also want to see if that therapist has a cultural competence, if they're, able to understand your culture and understand you and where you come from. That is very important. So you want client-centered, you want somebody that's culturally competent, that understands, your culture and doesn't put your culture to the background to deal with your issue. It all goes together. So we want to make sure that we're doing that. Those are two of the things that I want to talk about under prevention. Under intervention, if you see that someone needs a little bit more, that I'm not just coming in for a checkup. I know that this is impacting me. I know that my personality is starting to split, or I can see that, I'm the one that, you said, give yourself 2 weeks. And if I see in 2 weeks, I'm not able to get up off the couch, I'm not able to really function, and I'm seeing myself just kind of waste away and having thoughts that I wouldn't normally have, then I need to seek professional help with that. And we're looking on the intervention side. Again, you want to have somebody that's culturally competent. You want to make sure that there's somebody that cares about your somebodyness. That they care about you as an individual and where you come from and what you've come through. And all of that is infused within the care that they have for you. So that's important. Some of the other resources, and you had asked for some, there's some organizations that I would like to highlight, and I can also put them in the chat for you too as well. So that others may have them to be able to look back upon. But BEAM is one. It's a Black Emotional and Mental Health Collective. It's an organization that gives mental health training. They have toolkits, and they have a directory of African-American Black licensed therapists. Black Health Mental Health Alliance, they also give you those connectives. Ethos Club is a social wellness community where members can access group workouts, guided meditations, wellness salons, art workshops, all the things that we already are. You see how therapy just kind of encompasses that. So, and that's why I love when we started this conversation, because we were talking about this is already in the church. These are things we already do. These are things we already bring to bear. Psychology Today has a directory for African-American therapists right within your community. You can just, put in Psychology Today, African-American therapist, Louisville, Kentucky, and it'll lead you to all the therapists that are within our community, within the African-American community. And you can even put in your insurance or not insurance, and you'll be able to get some support there. Therapy for Black Girls, Clinicians of Color. Those are also some real powerful organizations. Clinicians of Color is just starting. They're already making a difference. They're already making a dent. And so that's good. Black African-American Behavioral Health Equity, Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services. That's good. Suicide prevention numbers. I mean, I can just go on if, as we're talking about looking at supportive services. And these are people that don't just have the traditional, but they support Black and brown people. And that's important to know. Again, I will put some of this list in the chat so that you all might have that and be able to refer to. The other thing that I would like to say, and I love talking about, when we talk about post-slavery mentality, looking at Dr. DeGruy, her book, DeGruy, that wrote post-slavery, and taking a look at what kind of impact, and a lot of our impulses, a lot of our thoughts, a lot of the things we do even now has been carried over from some of those things that we have experienced. So just being able to recognize that and hear the wisdom in this room collectively tonight is very important to know, hey, I might need to do some preventional types of things and be intentional about my wellness and be intentional about what I need to do to accomplish, all the things that I know God has called me to do and to be.
Pastor Cassandra Gray, thank you so much for that. Listen, someone already in the chat said, this needs to be a series. This has been such an intriguing and enlightening conversation. And I don't know about you, but Mr. Damon Cobble, this is probably one of the most well-attended forums that we've had. And that shows the importance, how important the Black church is to all of us, how it truly is our community. Pastor Cassandra Gray, Pastor Cosby, Pastor Snardon, and Pastor Bruce Williams, we thank you so much for weighing in with us tonight. Damon?
Krystal, thank you again. Panelist Dr. Cosby, Pastor Snardon, Dr. Williams, Cassandra Gray, love you all. Appreciate you all's contribution to this conversation, this very important conversation as we continue to address the gap of mental health and also of the Black community and the Black church. And also, I know Dr. King has come up a few times in this discussion, and I feel it's important to share that the historians found that Dr. King had his own bout with suicide attempt at age 13. And also, even as a young adult, he suffered from depression, but he suppressed that because he didn't want the opposition to use it against him. And so that's why this platform is so important. That's why these conversations are so important. So we can no longer allow America to hold us mentally and hold us hostage mentally. You know, having these open conversations makes it more comfortable. It's more empathetic, a lot more sympathy, and it makes it more free to have these conversations come forward whenever you're suffering from mental illness. So again, we thank you all for joining us. We hope that this was very helpful to the community. And Cassandra, if you don't mind, if you could email me those resources, follow us on our Facebook page. We would definitely highlight those resources Cassandra Gray had mentioned for the community. And we appreciate the community for coming out and listening. And you all have a blessed evening and a very safe weekend.